G'day, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Fan View. How exciting is this? It is a Monday night, it is 8 o'clock, and we're here talking about nerdy pop culture stuff. And with me for the first time ever in the history of the universe is good old Sarah. How you going, Sarah?
Hi, how you doing, everyone?
Good stuff. So we're doing this show for the next 6 weeks. So this is a 6-episode special talking about, I guess, pop culture from a fan's perspective. And I guess for a lot of people who'll be watching this show, be wondering, well, who we are, because I know a lot of people won't know who Sarah is. And so, Sarah, just to kick things off, give us a bit of a quick intro and spiel about who you happen to be.
My name is Sarah Cooper. I am a nerd from way back. Got my start in the Harry Potter fandom and have been involved in the Star Wars fandom, the cosplay scene, the gaming scene, and Marvel, of course, and other fandoms as come and go as it tends to be for any nerd.
Well done. Well, we've already got Mr. Aaron is coming along to say hello, and Christy said, "Nice to meet you, Sarah," which is particularly groovy. So I like the question mark there. I'm not sure why that's
with
there.
An H. Yes, with an H.
That's because get the spelling right and all the rest of it, which is particularly groovy. Now, unlike normal shows that we have, which tend to drag on for like an hour from like the Wednesday show that goes for 2 hours, we are going to try and cut this down to at least 40 minutes and to sort of keep it nice and free flowing and not take up more time than is necessary. But the key thing is that we're going to be discussing some topics which have had a massive impact in pop culture and how fans, especially fans of pop culture, have sort of seen these things and how they've reacted to them and the legacy that it's left. And of course, you've got to kick it all off with the old Marvel Cinematic Universe, the absolute beast of a thing that prior to 2008 didn't even exist, and now today has permeated our lives. And it's just hard to imagine that it all kicked off with the good old Iron Man. And so, Sarah, off the top of your head, do you remember what it was like when you first saw Iron Man when it came out back in 2008?
So I was still in high school, and actually Iron Man was not on my radar. I was unaware of Iron Man. I was busy doing my high school, my VCE. So as a result of that, I saw Iron Man for the first time after I saw Iron Man 2, which I saw Iron Man 2 in IMAX on the launch day. So the first day of it, I had a friend at uni just say, "Hey, we're going to the midnight screening of Iron Man 2. Do you want to come?" And I went, "I have no idea what that's about, but I will go to that." And from there, the love affair began.
Good stuff. And I love this comment from Michael saying, "Hey, you want to cut down the length of the show, just stop me from talking." Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one too. There you go. So the funny thing about when Iron Man came out, it was like the first movie that came out absolute nowhere. At the time, everybody was thinking, well, who cares about Iron Man anyway? And it just set off this a trigger, if you will, for what was to come afterwards. And for the next, well, even till today, but let's look for the 2010 down to 2020, the whole Marvel Cinematic behemoth has just taken off. And now I freely admit I'm not that much of a Marvel expert, but it's definitely in your camp. So can you sort of give us a bit of a rundown as to why you think it was as successful as it has been?
Honestly, it was very much lightning in a bottle, because Iron Man was the first one in the MCU, and it was really just, as they say in the Avengers, as Nick Fury says, there was an idea to bring together an exceptional group of individuals. I may have paraphrased that one, I'm sorry. And the thing was, when they first brought that movie out, when Iron Man came out, people did not expect it to do as well as it did, because Robert Downey Jr. was fresh off having a million scandals behind him. It had been a long time since anyone had thought of him as a leading man. And Iron Man, who cares about Iron Man? It's a B character. People like Spider-Man. That's pretty much all Marvel had going for it at the time in terms of the broader pop culture conversation. Was just they're the studio with Spider-Man and the X-Men, of course. So Iron Man, who's that? But then that movie came out, and it really did change everything.
So Michael has made point of saying it's the first time a comic book movie did the subject matter justice, and I suppose that's completely true. I don't know many people actually read the Iron Man comics. Did you actually into the comics at all?
Myself,
Yeah.
yes. Look, I dabble in the comics. I read them here and there. I must admit I'm not very good at making myself go to the comic shop every week to get every issue. So I tend to end up with some trades and then reading them from there. But what was I was going to say something, and my mind has immediately gone blank. So I apologize for that.
It's all right. We encourage blank minds here, so it's all pretty good. And even Aaron's money mentioned about the 60 years of great source material probably did help. And of course, now there was a whole bunch of things that were happening at the time. So Iron Man comes out as a massive success. And before you know it, they start bringing out the idea for movies for like other characters that prior to that people really didn't care about. And of course, amongst those was good old Captain America, the first Avenger. And I think if you looked upon the first movie, the Iron Man film, as being a great success, but it might have been a bit of a fluke, by the time Captain America came along, you just knew it. I was like, the people who are running everything from behind the scenes, they've really got their heads screwed on straight. And it was just success written out throughout the entire decade. And from as you saw it all, like once like Captain America came out, and I know that like you had Thor and all the rest of it along the way as well. Did you sort of start to see that, yes, there's actually a trend here of really, really successful movies that are pushing a lot of buttons? And why was it? What was the formula that made it happen? What do you think?
Honestly, it was just pure. You could tell that the people were making this, they really loved what they were doing, and they were looking at this broader picture. So from Iron Man, they just as an after credit scene, they just threw in Nick Fury and talking about the Avengers Initiative. And originally that was just an Easter egg. That was just something fun. But then they went, actually, well, what if we do a bit more? So then you've got the Incredible Hulk coming out not long after the previous Hulk movie that had been a few years earlier. Yeah. So they didn't want to reboot the franchise. So they basically just made another movie that was set just a little bit after the first one, but with completely different actors, completely different cast, completely different world. And then they threw an after credit scene in that one that linked back into the first Iron Man movie. And from there, you've suddenly got people going, wait, are they serious? Are they actually doing this? And then they announced that they're doing Captain America and Thor, which they came out very close together. And from there, I remember reading a hilarious article around the time Thor came out where they said that Marvel had really, rolled the dice and cast a bunch of no-names, that they decided to go with Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston to be the leads of the movie, rather than going with someone like Josh Hartnett or Matt Damon. And it was just the most hilarious article to read with the current context of what has happened since, because you look at that and you just go, these reviewers were just completely off base, because these were just star-making movies.
It's interesting because now we take it all for granted. Everything's there. The characters are there. The world building has been there. But when they were first doing each of these movies from their very beginning, so as I mentioned earlier, and as we've covered off, Iron Man was definitely out of left field and was a massive success. And when they started doing Thor, now I remember when Thor was announced, you're thinking, who gives a rat's bum about the God of Thunder? But as it turned out, the film was really successful, because you do think, what kind of story can they make around him? And then, of course, with Captain America being set during World War II, it was like, oh, okay, this is really intriguing in how they set him up originally as being a guy who was Captain America to be a promotion for war bonds, rather than just being a superhero out of the box. And there was a lot of good thought going into that. And I don't know how much of that was actually from the comics. So with that in mind, Aaron has mentioned belief in the studio and the material rather than rating the materials cash grab or something kind of unique. Well, yes, you could certainly argue that there was a lot of passion there from the people who were making these things in the first place. There was a lot of love, attention, and detail to it, which was really, really good. And Tari, taking the time to build the world instead of just grabbing what could make one or two good movies. And you are right. It is all about the world building and building the characters and giving them a personality and something that people could sort of latch onto. And it was intriguing sort of seeing it all start to come together as each movie came out. And they were churning them out pretty fast. If you remember, there was like, there's announcements about 4 or 5 in advance. And for a lot of people, it's like, wow, there's a lot going on here. So I personally think that the Marvel head studios, they had their gigantic whiteboard with all these things written out. They must have thought after the first couple of films that would like, we're on a winner chicken dinner formula here. And so did you sort of see it that way as well?
Yeah, look, I remember because after Iron Man 2, the next one I saw in the cinemas because I wasn't fully, completely into it yet. The next one I saw was Avengers. And I remember at uni, I was at the time studying games design, so lots of other nerds with me in my course. And I remember at the time everyone saying to me, "Oh, you don't know, they're making the Avengers. They're building together all of these other movies. They're all leading up to this one big comic book movie. And it's the first of its kind, a proper comic book event movie, because we've always had event comics where suddenly all the separate comics, they come together in one big world-changing event. And I think that's part of the formula that Marvel really, they understood and were able to translate it from the comics to film. And it was the kind of, in a way, I've always seen Marvel more as being a fan of the MCU is like being a fan of a very, very high budget TV show. And every episode is about a different character, but they all link back into the season finale. And the season finale tends to be the Avengers film. Yeah. I can't remember what your question was. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's not a problem at all. So Ads has said about a good story with a good quality of fun, interesting story, special effects and comedy. And yeah, there was definitely a lot of that. And I think that kind of worked. It didn't take itself too seriously a lot of the time. I mean, just winding the conversation right back, one of the things that I think endeared a lot of people, I mean, to me personally, with like even with Iron Man, was the fact you had all the stuff set in, I think it was Afghanistan or Iraq in the cave. And I thought, what a deep and dark way to start this off. You know, it had a really, really nasty edge to it. And then after that, it all sort of picked up and went in the direction that it did. And with the films, I don't think that they weren't afraid to show a little bit of darkness within them, but then show that, yes, all the heroes will actually prevail at the end of the day. And I think you're completely correct. Once they got around to the Avengers, it was like, oh, wow, this is like really high quality stuff. All these characters, including the ones that are just being introduced for the first time, it just cemented the quality of the thing together. And it was, of course, being a fantastic story and New York being attacked and whatever else, it was hard not to like it. And I think the timing of the entire thing worked really well too. Had it been 10 years prior, it probably wouldn't have worked. 10 years later, it wouldn't have worked. It just was at the right time to make everything just gel beautifully. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Like, it's one of those things that you can't imagine it being earlier or later, because before it you had things like Harry Potter was happening, and then after that you move into, well, every other studio is trying to make shared universe films these days. But what they did at that point in time is we went from they didn't have a superhero genre, and now you go into a JB Hi-Fi and they have an entire section that just says superhero movies. And that's the thing that I think Marvel really did. They created a new genre. And yeah, it's something that we really, I'm very thankful to them for that, because, whether some people I know do get burnt out on the superhero genre, but I just love it. Even a bad superhero movie is a good superhero movie in my eyes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some people did say that there were so many of them that some people were sort of struggling to keep up with them all. And there was a lot. I like this one from Aaron. People were invested in what they were seeing on screen, and they were sort of cheering the heroes and booing the bad guys and whatever else, and they really got invested in it. And it's kind of funny because that then shows that how it impacts the fan pop culture sort of ethos, if you will, where prior to 2008, nobody gave a rat's bum, as I said earlier, about Marvel and Iron Man and Captain America and all that. Now, all of a sudden, they're household names, and people are just absolutely hanging out for this stuff. So, as someone had pointed out to me that, prior to 2008, if you said, name a couple of major characters in the whole superhero ethos, you'd say, well, you got Bruce Wayne and you got, Clark Kent. Sorry, there you go.
Yeah.
That's it. Now, all of a sudden, you got Tony Stark. And it was like, oh, okay, that was prior to, once upon a time, nobody knew who he was. And now, of course, he's with the other two guys. And it just goes to show, I think, just how much of an impact that the films and the TV series as well have had on the world, as it were. So Marvel is everywhere now, and it's just like permeated its way right through the entire population for the past decade and a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, now we have in Melbourne, we have Marvel Stadium, where you can go and watch a football game. And if you go to Disneyland, you can go to Marvel Campus, Avengers Campus, and see Spider-Man in person and get a photo with Thor. And that is such a long distance from where we started, where if you said, who's Tony Stark? If someone said, "Oh, Tony Stark," you'd say, "Who's that? Is that a mechanic? I don't know who that is."
Totally agree with you. So everything's rolling along. You've got your Thors and your Hawkeyes and you've got Black Widow and you've got the Avengers and all that. And then all of a sudden, out of complete left field, they start doing things like Guardians of the Galaxy. And even I remember when the trailer for this came out, it was like, oh, this is really groovy. This is something completely left field, yet it's all part of the same cinematic universe, except you don't know how it all fits together. And of course, you didn't know that until much, much later with other movies came out. So it seemed as if like Marvel can do no wrong, that everything they think or plan has like just got success written all over it. And I think you'll probably have to struggle to find any of the movies that they produced as being inferior to anything else because they're standing on their own shoulders. So you got the shoulders of giants, yet they seem to sort of like complement each other quite well, even though in the timeline they sort of all jump around a little bit. And so what do you reckon? Did you feel like when, like even with Guardians, when that was coming out, did you think, oh, this is something really, really different and special?
Yes, so by this point in time, I was deeply into the Marvel fandom, and I actually there was a advanced screening in Sydney of Thor: The Dark World, so the second Thor movie, and Tom Hiddleston was there doing a live Q&A, and then he had a meet and greet. So I, as a massive Loki fangirl, definitely had to go. So my partner and I grabbed a flight up to Sydney. I risked getting fired from my job by taking a sick day, and we went and we met Tom Hiddleston. So that was excellent. But before they showed it wasn't an advanced screening of Thor: The Dark World. That wasn't quite out yet, so they weren't able to show it to us. But they were able to show us another screening of the Avengers. But before they put Avengers on, they gave us the previews that had previously been shown at Hall H at San Diego Comic-Con earlier that year. So this was information that wasn't widely shown to fans. It hadn't leaked onto the internet too much. There were a couple of fan cams, but it was stuff that wasn't really around. And they showed us the preview of Guardians of the Galaxy. And I remember people were like, "What's this? I'm not quite sure what this is," because the tone was just so different to what we'd previously seen. But I was just sitting there like, this is really weird and I'm really excited. And just the way that they had definitely gone with the art style of Jack Kirby. I'm pretty sure Jack Kirby. Unless he's Batman. Am I confusing myself? I'm sorry, my cat has...
Oh, no, that's okay. We
Valkyrie.
welcome cats and shows, so there you go.
Valkyrie, named after the character from Thor Ragnarok. Yes, she is here to say hi.
And there she is right there.
Yeah,
look at that. Only their mother can tell them apart, eh? Exactly how,
they look exactly the same. Exactly the same.
Absolutely love it. No, very, very cool. I agree with Rod. Guardians of the Galaxy was the next big great after Avengers, and it was definitely one of those things that nobody would have thought was going to be a hit. And I think what made it work was the fact that the music really dialed into people's psyche, and it was just, if something can be so different and still work. I mean, the history has shown a lot of movies that get produced, they do something a little bit left of center, and it just fails miserably. But even though, once again, we're dealing with a comic-based source material, it doesn't always translate well to film. We've got plenty of examples where that just never worked. Yet in this instance, and time again, I don't know who's in charge of the people allocating all the resources to the Marvel creative team. But some of those people, imagine walking down the street today saying, yeah, I was the one responsible for producing or writing or creating or designing all these films that kept hundreds of millions of people entertained in the past, decade or so. I reckon it's an absolute spin. Really. And yeah, when like things like Guardians of the Galaxy and even like Ant-Man and some of those other films came out, it was like, I mean, they're a little bit left of center, but they work just as equally as well. And because, yeah, I mean, you were sort of right there when it was all sort of occurring. Were you one of those people saying, oh, I'm waiting for the next one? What's the next one? I'm just really psyched and pumped with everything that was going on?
Oh, yes, definitely. I was the one that was refreshing to see if they ever had an event where Marvel might have been at, or Disney was there and they were announcing stuff. I was just refreshing my Twitter feed constantly, being like, what are they going to announce? What's coming next? What's coming up? So I was definitely one of those people. But honestly, the big thing that they were doing at that time was they were saying, well, we've got this formula and it works, but now let's just kind of flip that formula on its head a bit. So for Thor: The Dark World, they had a director. I've forgotten the name of them. Who previously they had just done episodes of Game of Thrones. Like that was the biggest thing they'd done up until that time. So they were going for something much more grounded in reality, but at the same time high fantasy. So they were trying to do that there. For Guardians of the Galaxy, you of course have my brain is blanking right now. A director who had previously worked on a lot of horror films and Scooby-Doo. So you've got someone completely different again. And then for Ant-Man, they went in a very odd direction and they hired Edgar Wright, who is famous for the Cornetto trilogy and, of course, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Unfortunately, his vision didn't quite align with Marvel's. The rumor is that he wanted the film to be completely standalone from the other Marvel films and to have Ant-Man die at the end. And Marvel didn't want to do that because they wanted him in the next Avengers film. So unfortunately, he parted ways before the film actually came out. But we did still end up with a wonderful film that was quite strongly influenced by the vision of Edgar Wright.
So when everything is rolling along and they're producing all this material and it's extremely successful, everybody is dialed into it, right? And I guess then you're right. You mentioned a thing about that. There's a bit of a formula going on here. The good guys are always winning. The bad guys are always losing, which is not a bad thing, by the way. There's always big fights and explosions and things going on. And how many cities can you destroy and all the rest of it. But I think if you do it differently each time, you can kind of get away with it. And that's when I think once you start pitting the good guys against the other good guys, so I think it's the second Avengers movie, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
The third so actually it's a Captain America movie. Civil War is a Captain America movie.
That's right. I couldn't remember. So my brain just goes melts at this
point.
But
it should have been an Avengers movie. It wasn't an Avengers
fair call. Movie. So you pit the good guys against the good guys, and then of course they confuse the audience. They go, well, which side do we support? And because in the story, of course, they're producing their own arguments as to why they're doing what they're doing. And so when something like that comes along, as someone like yourself, he says, well, previously we've had the good guys on this side, the bad guys on that side. Now we've got good guys versus good guys. I personally think it was a fantastic twist. It was a unique way of telling a story because it does confuse everybody and they don't know what to do. So how did you find all that once they started doing this with the characters, pitting them against each other?
Honestly, it was the first Marvel film and up until that point, Civil War was the first Marvel drama. I know a lot of people complained there wasn't quite enough action sequences in it, and there was a lot of talking, and that was because that movie, as I said, Marvel is a giant TV show. It's basically a soap opera on a very grand scale, and that movie, it really cemented the fact that all these characters, that interplay between them, it really is what is the glue of this franchise, and it is the reason why it keeps coming back and getting more and more films because people want to know what's going to happen next. That was an excellent one because it dipped into what we've set up in Iron Man 3. We've set up that Tony Stark, after the events of New York, has incredible post-traumatic stress from essentially saving the world and nearly being lost in space forever. And then you've got Steve Rogers, who is still coping with the realities of being a man out of time that was frozen and then has returned to the world. The woman of his dreams, who he was about to go on a date with, is dead. And sorry, spoilers for all of this. We probably should have said at the start, if you're watching this, we're going to talk about all of the movies and TV shows. But yeah, look, it really was. It was coming right back to that and getting to the core of these characters and what made them tick and how they would respond in this much bigger situation where essentially we've got the politicalization of superheroes, and that is something that if these movies need to stay at least a little bit grounded in reality, you do have to touch on the fact that they're blowing up a building. Who's going to pay for that building?
Yeah. What I found interesting is that because the experiment of using lesser known characters had become a success, characters that had obviously existed in comic books for a long, long, long time, but cinematically hadn't been that successful, then I think Marvel had said, well, okay, let's introduce this one and let's introduce that one. And some of them you're certainly scratching your heads over, but of course, history has shown they've all worked. This one I thought came out of complete left field, and that, of course, was Doctor Strange. Now, the irony, of course, is that Doctor Strange has got another movie coming out and this year in a couple of months' time, I think. And I thought this was intriguing because it went right on a completely different tangent involving the whole mysticism thing. And I think it sort of really focused a lot on the Infinity Stones. But how did you find this? Because I found this one a bit of a brain strain at the best of times. But yes, what are your thoughts?
Doctor Strange, it really was a break, because up until then, we've got everything in Marvel is very much based on science. So we've got Thor, and when he first meets Jane, who is an astrophysicist in the first Thor movie, he is explaining that, oh, I understand how this technology works. This is just how it works. And then Jane is saying, actually, it is these particles. It is this happening. It is. I'm not a scientist, so I can't go into the details of it. But it's very much rooted in science. And even the aliens, we've got aliens coming in, but it's scientific aliens. So then we get Doctor Strange, where they go, we're going to go on a completely left of field, and now we have literal magic. But at the same time, this magic then links back to quantum physics, and we're looking at the the theories of the multiverse, which it is a big area of study in science. So while we are going to, yes, there is now literal magic in this world, and we still are linking it back to science, which is just an incredible. I have no idea how they have managed it, but they have.
Well done. And another thing that came out at the time, so we're sort of like going in all sorts of directions here, and this one really did set the world on fire, and it came out, and I think you'll have a fair bit to sort of say about this, was, of course, when Black Panther was produced, the first time a superhero film devoted around an African-American person, well, in this case, supposed to be an African person, and sort of set the world on fire. And I've got to say, I think it drew a lot of people's attention to films of this nature, and it worked extremely well. So what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Black Panther came out exactly at the right point in time, as Marvel tends to be pretty on the money in terms of their timing with movies. But Black Panther, it very much was the right point in time. So we get a majority black cast. We've got it set in a fictional world of Wakanda, and this is a society that is Africa that has never been touched by colonialism or slavery. So it is essentially people of color existing and getting a chance to really build that history up. And also they've got access to the largest deposits of vibranium, which is one of the rarest minerals on Earth, because Wakanda is on a meteorite. I don't know if they actually go into this in the film, but this is in the comics. So there's some backstory for you. Essentially, we've got this great movie which is looking at how people respond to and react to colonialism. Essentially, it is a movie about colonialism in many ways. So we've got sorry, I'm just reading the comment. Yes, no, Wakanda, unfortunately, it's not a real place as far as we know. That said, in the comics, it is, and in the movies, it is for most of history cut off from the world because they are so technologically advanced, they're able to shield themselves from the outside world. So it could still be there. We don't know. Maybe. I've lost my train of thought. I apologize.
That's right. That's right. I put that up. Yeah, well, yeah, it's okay. It's no problem at all. So while the movies are all being churned out and doing extremely well, Marvel decided to turn their attention to TV series. Now, I think one of the first ones was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which sort of worked and sort of didn't work depending on your perspective. But in recent times now, with Disney Plus coming around and everything being on streaming services, they kicked everything off with good old WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier. So how did you take it? Like there's been 4 series so far. There's obviously more to come. What were your thoughts on the TV series that they were producing, the limited series?
I've absolutely loved these, and these ones, they came out at exactly the right point during lockdown. So it was one of those. Everything was happening if you were in Victoria or Melbourne specifically, you would have been going through lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, and having a return to something that came out weekly that was so much a part of the cultural discussion, and everyone just was talking about it. It was beautiful. It was perfectly timed, and again, just Marvel continuing to kick goals.
Good stuff. Hang on, I've got to press the right button there. So, yeah, so I've got to say the TV series, a lot of them have actually been really, really good. Like they've been cinematic quality for the small screen, and it was very funny because when WandaVision did come out, it threw everybody off kilter because of the whole black and white TV series introduction for the first few episodes. But it was very, very clever, really well thought out, and I think because it provides a lot of backstory for a lot of the characters or sort of alternative stories. I think that a lot of people really dialed into it, especially everything that occurs after the blip. There's a lot of films and TV series that are set either before, but either during or after. And the fact that they all gets covered off from different perspectives, I think is actually quite good because it grounds everything in its particular time frame. I mean, even with what I saw recently was the Eternals. And of course, the Eternals was also set just after the blip by a few months. And even they referenced that. And of course, it's such a significant part of the entire timeline of the story that it's got a lot going for it. Now, even I found Eternals, even though it was really left field from everything we'd seen previously, to be very entertaining. And once again, though, Marvel certainly know what they're doing. What do you think?
Look, a lot of people have reviewed Eternals a bit worse. I think it's the lowest rated Marvel movie to date at the moment. But I love for what it sets up. I love it for what it sets up. So personally, I feel like Eternals would have done really well if it had been a TV show, just because of the amount of characters they were introducing and the time they had to do it. It does make it a little bit difficult to really get in depth and get to know each individual character and their motivations. But it still is a fantastic thing because we're now delving into the celestial side of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, going back into the world of Jack Kirby, in which we are very much leading into the Fantastic Four, which I am very excited to see on the big screen for the fourth time. Is it the fourth attempt at a movie? We'll see how it goes this time.
And Angie, so a few people liked Eternals. I liked it. I thought it was actually very entertaining. As I said, I just take things at face value, and it was actually quite enjoyable. So we've got about 10 minutes to go, so we're going to keep this to 40 minutes. And I think now's a good sort of point to bring up. Okay, so the past almost 15 years, we'll say 14 years, has been extremely good for Marvel. They've gone through phase 1 through to phase 3. They're now touching on phase 4. They've got their TV series. It's like they can do no wrong. And even though there are people out there who go, we're a bit over the superhero movies, you can jump a couple here and there. Watch a couple of the main ones, the Captain America ones, the Avenger ones, maybe a Thor one here and there. The question has to be asked to one thing, where do they go to from here once you got past phase 4 and the future and the sustainability of what they can do? Will there be a point where people go, you know what, we're just over it? There are like 30, at the moment there are 27 films. Once they get past 30 and then into 35 and then towards potentially 40, do you think in the next 10 years, give or take, there could be a case where it all starts to taper off? Or will Marvel have the sense to say, quick while we're ahead, or just push it to the nth? They go, all right, now we're sort of destroying it. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely don't think Disney owns Marvel, and Disney is definitely not going to stop anytime soon. They are continuing to milk this cash cow, and I completely am here for it. So I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. So I think we are very much going to be looking forward to the celestial incidents in the MCU. We are also moving into the multiverse as another thing. Sorry, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. You were saying that people are getting burnt out on Marvel movies, and that is true to an extent. But the other thing that you get is everyone after Endgame said that's the best Marvel movie they've ever made, the best superhero film you've ever made. How can they top that? They can't top that. They should just quit there. But then the most recent Spider-Man movie came out, and everyone lost their minds. And that movie in many ways saved cinema blockbuster cinema after the pandemic, because it, for a lot of cinemas, was the first big movie that they were able to get people back seeing in large numbers. So a lot of cinemas that were going to close didn't close because they had Spider-Man and people really wanted to see Spider-Man. Everyone was J. Jonah Jameson. They just wanted pictures of Spider-Man. But yeah.
No, keep going. It's all right.
No, I've lost my, yeah.
It's an interesting one because you are right. I know, like even with Doctor Strange and all the rest of it, the current, or the new movie that's coming out, they're focusing on the multiverse and all the rest of it. And I have, as a layman, as effectively some just random dude watching these things who don't read the comics, don't really sort of follow the whole history of everything. realized that up until now, it's all been a relatively linear timeline. Okay, so you got this character here follow suit to this character there, this story here. Sure, you can mix them out, match them up, mix and match them a little bit, but they're all pretty straightforward. And now that we're heading into this whole thing of like, oh, we've got multiverses now, I do wonder if the general person on the street will be able to dial into that or not. Or they go, all right, now I'm confused. Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 20, Earth 40, whatever else. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because conceivably, you could potentially make exactly the same movie 5 times with 5 different outcomes, and yet they're all canon because they're all set in different Earths or different multiverses. And sure, it's a great way of, this film made $1 billion. So let's make another movie with exactly the same characters with a slightly different story with a different outcome, because you can do that from a canon perspective. Do you think that has the potential of impacting the way the audience sees it, or do you reckon they'll just dial into it no matter what?
I think it's absolutely a challenge that Marvel is going to have to face. So now that they've purchased, essentially Disney purchased Fox so they could have the X-Men. That's the main reason that was done. And Fantastic Four as well. But I think that may have reverted just beforehand. There was lots of legal things going on there. And having now they've got Spider-Man, and Sony has that agreement with Marvel that they are able to make these Spider-Man movies, that all the Spider-Man movies are now canon in the MCU. So everyone we've had is now canon in the MCU, which is just fantastic. I feel like the big challenge is going to be deciding whether or not they continue working it all together and they eventually go back to one shared timeline, or if they decide to just explode it out and have multiple different timelines and everything is separate and people can tune in and out of what they want to tune in and out of. And I think that's going to be the choice they're going to have to make after Multiverse of Madness. And actually, no, later than that, because then they've got Ant-Man Quantumania and Morbius.
Yeah.
No, not Morbius. I've forgotten. Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is likely to be the next big target against the Avengers. And we're working towards a Young Avengers storyline as well. So it's really, they're setting so many things up, and Marvel has been doing that since Iron Man. They've been planting the seeds and watering them and watching them grow, and it's going to be very interesting to see who can keep up and who falls off, because honestly, it is a lot. It is a lot. It's a huge commitment to be on top of everything Marvel, and if you're not a massive fan of it, you're likely to fall behind, and it's going to be very much a balancing act to make sure that they get that to a point where the average person can pop in, watch a film, enjoy it, and then pop out again, and then maybe not watch another one for another 3 years, but they'll still enjoy it and still understand what's going on.
Very well said. And Rod, who is actually sitting downstairs from you at the moment, has said has given validity to superhero movies as their own genre, and I certainly agree with that. History has had a lot of superhero films that have not done very, very well for whatever reason. And in the past decade and a bit, it's been the complete opposite. And sort of Marvel are on the map. And at least for the foreseeable future, I tend to agree with you. They've obviously got their stuff worked out well. And they've done exceedingly well in the previous decade. So there's no reason to see why that momentum should stop. And well done to you. We're about to wrap this up because we only wanted to keep it to 40 minutes. Is there any final thing you wanted to say regarding the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or have you covered everything off?
I feel like we've covered pretty much everything. Everything going forward, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens next, how they're able to keep going, and is Marvel able to continue... Sorry, Marvel, not Marvel. Is Marvel able to continue making successful films, or are we destined for it all to blow up? But I'm very excited to see what comes in next.
Yeah. Either way, it's we've had a good run, and we're continuing to have a good run, and there's more stuff coming out, which is extremely important. Now we're about to wrap up this particular episode. Next week, we'll actually tell you what we're going to be discussing next week. We're going to be discussing about the whole growing popularity of cosplay. I prefer the term costuming because I'm an old fart, but we'll go with cosplay. And I know Sarah's really dialed into the whole cosplay thing. Is that right?
Yes. I've been cosplaying since around the time the first Marvel movie started coming out. So the first my first costume convention when I moved to Melbourne was in 2011, but my first costume that I did was dressing up as Jasmine for book fair in primary school when I was a kid. So I've been cosplaying for a long time.
Well, guess what? I can kind of top you on that one because I've been costuming. That's what I call it in the fan community since 1985. So how about that? Plenty of things to discuss next week. Anyway, we're going to buzz off now. So thanks for joining us for this first episode, first of 6 episodes. So hopefully got something out of it. Get your Marvel hats on because there's more movies and TV shows to come. It's very, very exciting. Hope you enjoy the show. Tell all your friends about us. It is the view of fans, or is it the fan view? All right, we'll leave you to it. Take care, and we'll catch you next week. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.